September 28, 1864, 8:00 p.m., St. Martin's Hall, Longacre, London. 2,000 workers from across Europe pack into a smoke-filled auditorium, their voices rising in passionate debate about wages, working conditions, and the fundamental structure of human society. At the podium stands a bearded German exile, whose thunderous rhetoric and revolutionary vision will soon electrify the assembly and change the course of world history. Heinrich Marx, political refugee and economic theorist, addresses the founding meeting of the International Workingmen's Association with words that will echo across continents and centuries. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. But the bloodline that produced this revolutionary genius stretches back through generations of German rabbis, merchants, and intellectuals, whose accumulated wisdom and rebellious spirit would culminate in the creation of the most influential critique of capitalism ever conceived. The paternal ancestry of Karl Marx can be traced back to the rabbinical traditions of the Rhineland, where the Marx family established themselves as respected Jewish scholars and religious leaders during the turbulent medieval period. The earliest documented ancestor was Rabbi Meir Katzenellenbogen, born around 1482 C. in Padua, Italy. During the Renaissance, when Jewish intellectual life flourished under relatively tolerant Italian city-states, before the harsh restrictions of the Counter-Reformation, Rabbi Meir, known as the Maharam of Padua, belonged to a distinguished lineage of Talmudic scholars whose commentaries and legal decisions influenced Jewish communities throughout Central Europe, establishing intellectual traditions of rigorous analysis and logical argumentation that would resurface centuries later in the writings of his descendants, who would become revolutionary figures. Rabbi Meir's son, Samuel Katzenellenbogen, born around 1520 CE during the early years of the Protestant Reformation, continued the family tradition of rabbinic scholarship, while adapting to the changing political and religious landscape of 16th-century Europe. Samuel's migration from Italy to Germany reflected the broader movements of Jewish populations, seeking communities where their learning could flourish despite increasing religious persecution. His establishment in Frankfurt am Main placed the family at the center of one of Europe's most important Jewish intellectual communities, where Talmudic scholarship combined with emerging secular learning to create a sophisticated intellectual environment. The family name Marx first appeared in documented records through Samuel's descendant, Rabbi Marx Levi, born around 1580 CE in Frankfurt during the reign of Rudolf II, when the Holy Roman Empire still maintained relative religious tolerance despite growing confessional tensions. Rabbi Marx's scholarly reputation extended throughout the German Jewish communities, and his response on questions of religious law demonstrated the analytical rigor and systematic thinking that would characterize the Marx intellectual tradition. His decision to settle in Trier, the ancient Roman city on the Moselle River, established the family's connection to the region where Karl Marx would eventually be born. The genealogical line continued through Rabbi Marx Levy's son, Joshua Heschel Marx, born around 1610 C during the early phases of the 30 Years' War that would devastate Central Europe and fundamentally alter the relationship between religious and secular authority. Joshua's rabbinical career coincided with one of the most catastrophic periods in European Jewish history, as warfare, disease, and religious persecution decimated communities throughout Germany. His survival and continued scholarship during this period demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that enabled Jewish intellectual traditions to persist, despite external pressures and internal upheavals. Joshua's son, Samuel Marx, born around 1650 CE in Trier, inherited both his family's scholarly traditions and their growing awareness of the tensions between religious orthodoxy and secular intellectual development that characterized late 17th century European culture. Samuel's rabbinical training occurred during the emergence of early Enlightenment, thinking that challenged traditional religious authority, while promoting rational inquiry and scientific investigation. His exposure to these intellectual currents, even within the relatively insular Jewish community, planted seeds of critical thinking that would influence his descendants' approach to religious and secular questions. The Marx family's intellectual evolution accelerated during the early 18th century through Samuel's son, Samuel Marx, born around 1680 CE. When Louis XIV France dominated European politics and culture, Marx Samuel's rabbinical career coincided with the beginning of the Jewish Enlightenment, or Haskalah, which encouraged Hebrew learning while promoting integration with broader European intellectual culture. His scholarly interests expanded beyond traditional Talmudic studies to include natural philosophy, mathematics, and languages, reflecting the growing influence of rationalist thinking even within Orthodox Jewish communities. Marx Samuel's son, Mordechai Marx Levi, born around 1715 CE during the War of Spanish Succession, represented a crucial transitional generation as Enlightenment ideas increasingly penetrated Jewish intellectual life throughout Germany. Mordechai's rabbinical training included exposure to secular subjects that prepared him for dialogue with Christian scholars and participation in the broader intellectual movements of his time. His correspondence with Christian Hebraists and his study of contemporary philosophical works demonstrated the family's growing engagement with secular learning and their movement toward intellectual positions that would eventually transcend traditional religious boundaries. The transformation of the Marx family from orthodox rabbinical scholars to secular intellectuals reached a crucial stage with Mordechai's son, Herschel Marx, born on April 15, 1777, in Trier during the American Revolution, when Enlightenment ideals of liberty and equality were challenging traditional political and social hierarchies throughout the Western world. Herschel's education combined traditional Jewish learning with exposure to German philosophy, French rationalism, and emerging economic theories that questioned fundamental assumptions about property, authority, and social organization. His intellectual development occurred during the French Revolution and its aftermath, when radical political ideas transformed European political consciousness and created new possibilities for social and economic reform. Herschel's decision to convert to Protestantism in 1816 and to change his name to Heinrich Marx represented both a personal response to anti-Semitic restrictions and a symbolic break with traditional religious authority that reflected his embrace of Enlightenment, rationalism, and secular humanism. This conversion enabled him to pursue a legal career that had been closed to Jews while placing him at the intersection of German intellectual and professional life, where liberal political ideas flourished despite conservative government repression. His position as a respected lawyer in Trier provided him with financial security and social status while exposing him to the political and economic tensions that characterized post-Napoleonic German society. Heinrich's marriage to Henriette Pressburg in 1814 united two families whose combined intellectual traditions and social aspirations created the optimal environment for nurturing revolutionary thinking in their children. Henriette came from a Dutch Jewish family that had achieved prosperity through commerce, while maintaining connections to both Jewish learning and secular European culture. Her family's success in international trade provided practical knowledge of capitalist economic relationships, while their intellectual interests exposed them to critical analysis of social and economic institutions. The convergence of Heinrich's legal and philosophical training with Henriette's commercial and cultural background created a household where critical thinking about society and economics became a natural family conversation. The Marx household in Trier became a center of liberal intellectual activity, where Heinrich hosted discussions among lawyers, physicians, government officials, and educated merchants who shared progressive political views despite the conservative political atmosphere of Restoration Germany. These gatherings exposed the Marx children to sophisticated political and economic analysis, while demonstrating the practical application of Enlightenment principles to contemporary social problems. The combination of intellectual stimulation and political engagement that characterized the Marx family environment provided the foundation for Karl's later revolutionary development. Heinrich's professional success as a lawyer specializing in commercial law brought him into direct contact with the economic transformations occurring throughout the Rhineland as industrialization began changing traditional production methods and social relationships. His legal work involving factory disputes, commercial contracts, and property rights provided him with practical knowledge of capitalist economic mechanisms, while exposing him to the social tensions created by economic modernization. These professional experiences informed family discussions about economic justice and social reform that would profoundly influence Karl's intellectual development. The birth of Karl Heinrich Marx on May 5, 1818, in Trier occurred during a period of intense political reaction following Napoleon's defeat, when the Congress of Vienna system attempted to restore traditional monarchical authority throughout Europe, while suppressing the democratic and nationalist Itoisne movements that had emerged during the Revolutionary and Napoleonic periods. The infant's arrival into this world of political tension and intellectual ferment placed him at the intersection of conservative authority and liberal opposition that would define his entire intellectual and political career. Karl's early childhood was immersed in an atmosphere of intellectual inquiry and political discussion that distinguished the Marx household from typical middle-class German families of the period. Heinrich's extensive library contained works by Voltaire, Diderot, Lessing, and other Enlightenment authors whose rationalist critiques of traditional authority provided intellectual foundations for questioning existing social and political arrangements. Henriette's contributions to family discussions reflected her own sophisticated understanding of economic and cultural questions, creating an environment where both parents served as intellectual mentors for their precocious son. The educational opportunities available to Karl in Trier reflected both his family's social position and the relatively liberal intellectual atmosphere that persisted in the Rhineland, despite increasing political repression throughout Germany. His enrollment in the Trier Gymnasium provided him with a classical education emphasizing Greek and Latin literature, rhetoric, and philosophy that prepared students for university studies, while exposing them to democratic ideals and rational inquiry that challenged authoritarian political systems. His academic performance demonstrated exceptional ability in languages, literature, and philosophical analysis that predicted his later achievements as a writer and theorist. Karl's gymnasium years coincided with his intellectual awakening to the political and social questions that would dominate his mature career. His exposure to classical literature and philosophy introduced him to concepts of justice, equality, and social organization that contrasted sharply with the hierarchical and authoritarian reality of contemporary German society. His reading of German Romantic literature and philosophy, particularly the works of Goethe and Schiller, fostered an appreciation for individual creativity and social criticism, while his study of French revolutionary writings exposed him to radical political ideas that challenged fundamental assumptions about property and authority. The young Karl's intellectual development was also shaped by his observation of social and economic conditions in Trier and the surrounding Rhineland region, where traditional agricultural society was giving way to early industrial development that created new forms of wealth and poverty. His family's comfortable middle-class lifestyle contrasted sharply with the conditions experienced by factory workers, agricultural laborers, and unemployed artisans whose traditional livelihoods were being destroyed by economic modernization. These early observations of social inequality and economic exploitation planted seeds of social consciousness that would later flower into revolutionary political commitment. Karl's enrollment at the University of Bonn in 1835 marked his transition from provincial intellectual development to exposure to the sophisticated academic and political culture of German university life. Bonn's reputation as a center of liberal political activity attracted students and faculty who shared critical attitudes toward conservative government policies while promoting democratic and nationalist ideals. His initial studies in law and liberal arts provided a comprehensive education in historical, philosophical, and legal subjects, that broadened his intellectual horizons, while exposing him to systematic analysis of social and political institutions. The romantic enthusiasms and bohemian lifestyle that characterized Karl's year at Bonn reflected both his youthful exuberance and his rebellion against the conventional career expectations that his family harbored for his future. His involvement in student dueling societies, his accumulation of debts, and his apparent neglect of serious academic work concerned Heinrich, while revealing Karl's emerging personality as someone who valued intellectual and personal freedom above social respectability and financial security. These characteristics would persist throughout his life and significantly influence his approach to both personal relationships and political activities. Heinrich's decision to transfer Karl to the University of Berlin in 1836 reflected both parental concern about his son's direction and recognition that Berlin's more serious academic atmosphere might channel Karl's exceptional abilities toward productive intellectual work. The University of Berlin during the 1830s was dominated by the philosophical system of G.W.F. Hegel, whose dialectical method and comprehensive worldview provided the theoretical framework that would profoundly influence Karl's intellectual development. His exposure to Hegelian philosophy through lectures and seminars introduced him to systematic thinking about historical development, social change, and the relationship between ideas and material reality. Karl's engagement with Hegelian philosophy occurred through his participation in the Young Hegelian movement, a group of radical students and young intellectuals who applied Hegel's dialectical method to criticism of existing political and religious institutions. This intellectual community provided him with his first systematic exposure to revolutionary political thinking, while offering practical experience in collaborative intellectual work and political organization. His relationships with figures like Bruno Bauer, Arnold Rouge, and Ludwig Feuerbach introduced him to diverse approaches to social criticism, while exposing him to the international networks of radical intellectuals that were beginning to challenge traditional authority throughout Europe. The completion of Karl's doctoral dissertation on ancient Greek philosophy in 1841 demonstrated his mastery of philosophical analysis, while revealing his emerging interest in materialism and social criticism that would characterize his mature theoretical work. His comparative study of Democritus and Epicurus focused on questions of determinism, freedom, and the relationship between theory and practice that would remain central concerns throughout his intellectual career. The dissertation's sophisticated analysis of philosophical questions, combined with its implicit criticism of religious and political authority, established Karl as a serious intellectual, while preparing him for the radical political activities that would soon dominate his life. Karl's brief career as a journalist and editor of the Rheinische Zeitung in Cologne during 1842-43 provided his first practical experience in political activism, while exposing him to systematic analysis of contemporary economic and social problems. His editorial work required him to address practical questions about freedom of the press, economic policy, and social legislation that forced him to move beyond abstract philosophical speculation toward concrete analysis of political and economic relationships. His articles on economic questions, particularly his analysis of laws regarding theft of wood and wine regulations, demonstrated his growing awareness of how legal and political institutions serve the interests of property owners against those of workers and peasants. The government suppression of the Rheinische Zeitung in 1843 provided Karl with direct experience of state censorship and political repression, while convincing him that meaningful social change required more radical measures than journalistic criticism and liberal political reform. His recognition that the Prussian state would not tolerate even moderate criticism of existing economic and social arrangements led him to conclude that systematic revolutionary action was necessary to achieve social justice and human freedom. This realization marked his transition from liberal critic to revolutionary socialist, while preparing him for the exile that would characterize the remainder of his career. Karl's marriage to Jenny von Westphalen in 1843 represented both a personal milestone and a political alliance that would profoundly influence his intellectual and political development. Jenny's aristocratic background and exceptional intelligence made her an unusual choice for someone from Karl's middle-class family, while her own radical political sympathies and intellectual abilities made her an ideal partner for someone whose career would be dedicated to revolutionary politics. Her willingness to share the hardships of political exile and financial insecurity demonstrated both her personal devotion and her commitment to the political causes that would define their life together. The couple's move to Paris in 1843 marked the beginning of Karl's transformation from German philosophical radical to international revolutionary as he encountered the sophisticated socialist and communist movements that flourished in the relatively liberal atmosphere of the July monarchy in France. His exposure to French socialist theorists like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon and Louis Blanc introduced him to systematic economic analysis and revolutionary political strategy, while his contacts with German exile communities provided opportunities for collaborative theoretical work and political organization. The intellectual stimulation of Parisian radical politics accelerated his theoretical development, while providing practical experience in international revolutionary coordination. Karl's collaboration with Friedrich Engels, beginning with their meeting in Paris in 1844, created one of the most productive and influential intellectual partnerships in modern history. Engels' practical knowledge of industrial capitalism gained through his experience managing his family's textile operations in Manchester complemented Karl's theoretical and philosophical expertise, while their shared commitment to revolutionary socialism provided the foundation for decades of collaborative work. Their joint authorship of the Holy Family and the German ideology established the theoretical foundations of historical materialism, while demonstrating their ability to combine rigorous analysis with practical political engagement. The development of Karl's economic theories during the mid-1840s reflected his systematic study of classical economists like Adam Smith and David Ricardo, combined with his philosophical training and his observation of contemporary social conditions. His economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, while not published during his lifetime, revealed his emerging understanding of alienated labor and the mechanisms of capitalist exploitation that would later be developed in his mature economic works. His analysis of how capitalist production relationships separated workers from the products of their labor and from their essential human nature provided the foundation for his later comprehensive critique of capitalist economics. Karl's expulsion from Paris in 1845, at the request of the Prussian government, demonstrated both his growing reputation as a dangerous radical and the international cooperation among conservative governments to suppress revolutionary activities. His relocation to Brussels continued his exile, while providing new opportunities for theoretical work and political organization within the relatively tolerant atmosphere of the constitutional monarchy of Belgium. His residence in Brussels coincided with his most intensive period of theoretical development, as he synthesized his philosophical, economic, and political insights into the comprehensive worldview that would guide his later revolutionary activities. The Communist Manifesto, written by Karl and Engels in 1847-48 for the Communist League, represented the first systematic presentation of their revolutionary theory and political program to an international audience. This brief but explosive document combined historical analysis, economic theory, and revolutionary strategy into a compelling call for proletarian revolution that would transform capitalist society into a classless communist system. The manifesto's famous opening words, "A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism," captured both the growing influence of socialist ideas and the fear they inspired among established authorities throughout the continent. The revolutionary upheavals of 1848 provided Karl with his first opportunity to participate directly in mass political movements as democratic and nationalist revolutions challenged conservative authority throughout Europe. His return to Germany and his editorship of the new Rheinische Zeitung allowed him to combine journalistic work with practical political organization, while testing his theoretical insights against the reality of revolutionary political struggle. His analysis of the revolution's course and ultimate failure provided valuable lessons about the conditions necessary for successful revolutionary change, while reinforcing his conviction that only systematic proletarian revolution could achieve fundamental social transformation. Karl's exile to London, following the defeat of the 1848 revolutions, marked the beginning of the most productive period of his intellectual career, as he settled into the research and writing that would produce his greatest theoretical works. The British Museum's extensive library provided him with access to economic data and historical sources that enabled systematic analysis of capitalist development, while London's position as the center of world capitalism allowed him to observe the most advanced forms of industrial production and commercial organization. His daily research routine at the British Museum became legendary among other scholars and revolutionaries who observed his extraordinary dedication to intellectual work. The Marx family's economic circumstances during their London years reflected both the practical difficulties of political exile and Karl's dedication to theoretical work over commercially viable employment. Their frequent financial crises, periodic evictions, and constant anxiety about necessities created enormous stress for Jenny and their children, while testing Karl's commitment to revolutionary politics against family responsibilities. Engels' financial support, derived from his business activities in Manchester, provided crucial assistance that enabled Karl to continue his research, while highlighting the irony that his revolutionary work depended on profits from capitalist enterprise. Karl's journalistic work for the New York Tribune during the 1850s provided both needed income and opportunities to apply his theoretical insights to the analysis of contemporary political and economic developments. His articles on British politics, European revolutions, and international economic relationships demonstrated his ability to combine theoretical sophistication with practical political analysis, while introducing his ideas to American audiences. His coverage of events like the Crimean War, the Indian Rebellion, and the American Civil War revealed his developing understanding of global capitalist development and its relationship to political conflict and social change. The composition of the Grundrisse during 1857–58 represented Karl's most ambitious attempt to develop a comprehensive theoretical framework for understanding capitalist economic relationships and their historical development. This massive collection of notes and draft chapters, not published until the 20th century, revealed the scope of his economic analysis and his method for investigating the fundamental laws governing capitalist production and exchange. The Grundrisse's detailed analysis of concepts like commodity production, surplus value, and capital accumulation provided the theoretical foundation for his later published works while demonstrating the extraordinary breadth of his economic knowledge. Karl's involvement in founding the International Workingmen's Association in 1864 marked his return to active political organization after years of primarily theoretical work. His role in drafting the association's founding documents and his participation in its governing council provided opportunities to apply his theoretical insights to practical questions of international working-class organization and revolutionary strategy. The International's activities during its first decade demonstrated both the potential for international working-class solidarity and the practical difficulties of maintaining unity among diverse national and ideological factions. The publication of the first volume of Kapital in 1867 represented the culmination of Karl Marx's economic research and his most systematic presentation of his analysis of capitalist production relationships. This monumental work combined rigorous theoretical analysis with empirical investigation of contemporary economic conditions to provide a comprehensive critique of capitalist economics and a scientific foundation for revolutionary political action. Kapital's detailed analysis of concepts like commodity fetishism, surplus value extraction, and capital accumulation revealed the fundamental mechanisms of capitalist exploitation, while predicting the system's eventual collapse due to its internal contradictions. Kapital's initial reception among both academic economists and revolutionary activists demonstrated both the work's theoretical sophistication and its practical political implications. While bourgeois economists largely ignored or dismissed Karl's analysis, socialist and anarchist movements throughout Europe recognized the work's importance for understanding contemporary economic relationships and developing effective revolutionary strategies. The book's influence on international working-class movements grew steadily during the late 19th century, as translated editions made Karl's analysis available to broader audiences, while his theoretical insights guided practical political organization. Karl's analysis of the Paris Commune in 1871 provided his most detailed examination of actual revolutionary government, while revealing his evolving understanding of the political forms necessary for proletarian rule. His pamphlet *The Civil War in France* praised the Commune's democratic innovations and its attempts to create new forms of participatory government, while analyzing the reasons for its eventual defeat by conservative military forces. His identification of the Commune as the first example of the dictatorship of the proletariat influenced subsequent revolutionary movements, while contributing to debates about the relationship between democracy and socialism that would continue throughout the socialist movement's development. The final years of Karl's life were marked by continued theoretical work on the remaining volumes of Kapital, combined with growing involvement in debates within the international socialist movement about revolutionary strategy and political organization. His correspondence with revolutionary leaders throughout Europe and America revealed his continuing engagement with practical political questions, while his theoretical notebooks demonstrated his ongoing research into economic and historical questions. His health problems and family tragedies during this period created personal challenges that affected his productivity, while highlighting the personal costs of his lifelong dedication to revolutionary politics. Jenny Marx's death in 1881 devastated Karl both personally and intellectually, as he lost not only his closest companion, but also his most important intellectual collaborator and political advisor. Her contributions to his theoretical work through research assistance, editorial suggestions, and political insights had been crucial to his achievement, while her practical management of family affairs had enabled him to concentrate on intellectual work, despite constant financial pressures. Her death marked the beginning of his own physical and intellectual decline, as he struggled to complete his theoretical projects while coping with grief and illness. Karl's death on March 14, 1883, in London ended one of the most influential intellectual careers in modern history, while beginning the process of interpretation and application of his theoretical legacy that would profoundly influence 20th century political development. His funeral, attended by only a handful of family members and close associates, provided little indication of the massive influence his ideas would eventually exercise over revolutionary movements throughout the world. Engels' eulogy, comparing Karl's contribution to social science with Darwin's contribution to natural science, predicted the historical significance that would eventually be accorded to his theoretical achievements. The immediate aftermath of Karl's death revealed both the incomplete state of his theoretical project and the enormous task facing those who sought to preserve and develop his intellectual legacy. Engels' dedicated work editing and publishing the remaining volumes of Kapital ensured that Karl's economic analysis would be available to future generations, while the establishment of socialist parties throughout Europe provided institutional frameworks for applying his theoretical insights to practical political action. The rapid growth of international socialist movements during the late 19th century demonstrated the practical relevance of his analysis, while revealing the diverse interpretations that could be derived from his theoretical work. The influence of Karl's theoretical work on subsequent economic and political thought extended far beyond the socialist movements that explicitly adopted his analysis to include mainstream academic disciplines and political movements that were forced to respond to his critiques of capitalist society. His analysis of class struggle, economic exploitation, and historical development influenced sociology, anthropology, political science, and history, while his critique of capitalist economics forced bourgeois economists to develop more sophisticated defenses of market relationships. So even non-socialist intellectuals were compelled to address the questions he raised about social justice, economic equality, and political democracy. The practical application of Karl's theoretical insights in 20th-century revolutionary movements demonstrated both the power and the limitations of his analysis for guiding political action under diverse historical circumstances. The Russian Revolution of 1917 provided the first large-scale test of Marxist revolutionary strategy, while subsequent communist revolutions in China, Cuba, Vietnam, and other countries revealed the adaptability of his ideas to different economic and social conditions. However, the authoritarian outcomes of many supposedly Marxist regimes raised questions about the relationship between his theoretical analysis and practical political implementation that continue to influence contemporary debates about socialism and democracy. The scholarly interpretation of Karl's theoretical work has evolved significantly since his death, as new manuscript discoveries, changing political circumstances, and developing academic methodologies have revealed different aspects of his intellectual achievement. The publication of previously unknown works, like the Grundrisse and the economic and philosophical manuscripts, provided new insights into his theoretical development, while recent scholarship has emphasized different aspects of his analysis, including his ecological concerns, his anthropological interests, and his democratic political commitments. These scholarly developments have challenged simplified interpretations of his work, while revealing the complexity and sophistication of his theoretical system. The contemporary relevance of Karl's analysis has been renewed by recent economic crises, increasing inequality, and environmental degradation that appear to validate many of his predictions about capitalist development. His analysis of capitalism's tendency toward crisis, his prediction of increasing monopolization, and his concerns about the environmental consequences of profit-driven production have gained new relevance as global capitalism faces challenges that seem to confirm his theoretical insights. Contemporary social movements addressing economic inequality, environmental destruction, and democratic participation have found inspiration in his analysis, while adapting his insights to current conditions. The global influence of Karl's ideas extends far beyond academic and political circles to include their impact on literature, art, theology, and popular culture throughout the world. His analysis of alienation, exploitation, and human liberation has influenced artistic expression and cultural criticism, while his vision of a more just and democratic society has inspired religious and ethical movements seeking to apply spiritual values to social relationships. The continuing presence of his ideas in contemporary cultural debates demonstrates their enduring relevance for understanding human social relationships and possibilities for social transformation. The economic analysis developed in Karl's theoretical work continues to provide insights into contemporary capitalist development, including globalization, technological change, and financial instability that mainstream economics has difficulty explaining. His concepts of surplus value, commodity fetishism, and capital accumulation remain relevant for understanding how contemporary capitalism functions, while his analysis of class relationships provides frameworks for analyzing current social conflicts and political movements. Recent economic research has validated many of his empirical predictions, while his theoretical methods continue to inspire alternative approaches to economic analysis. The political implications of Karl's theoretical work remain controversial, as different political movements claim his legacy, while disagreeing about the practical meaning of his insights for contemporary political action. Democratic socialists emphasize their commitments to political freedom and worker participation, while communist movements stress their analysis of revolutionary necessity and proletarian dictatorship. Social democratic parties highlight their concerns about economic inequality and social justice, while anarchist groups emphasize their critique of state power and their vision of a stateless communist society. These diverse interpretations reflect both the complexity of his theoretical work and its continued relevance for contemporary political debates. The methodological innovations introduced in Karl's theoretical work have influenced academic disciplines far beyond economics and political science to include anthropology, sociology, history, and cultural studies. His historical materialist method provided new approaches to understanding social development, while his dialectical analysis offered sophisticated tools for investigating social contradictions and change processes. His integration of philosophical, economic, and political analysis created interdisciplinary approaches that have influenced scholarly research, while his emphasis on practical engagement has inspired academic movements seeking to connect theoretical work with social transformation. The feminist interpretation of Karl's theoretical work has revealed both progressive and problematic aspects of his analysis, while highlighting questions about gender relationships that he did not adequately address. His analysis of capitalist exploitation and his vision of human liberation have inspired feminist movements, while his neglect of gender-specific forms of oppression and his conventional assumptions about family relationships have been criticized by feminist scholars. Contemporary feminist theorists have developed his insights while correcting his limitations to create more comprehensive analyses of social oppression and liberation that address both class and gender relationships. The environmental implications of Karl's analysis have gained increasing attention as ecological crises have revealed the environmental costs of capitalist production relationships that he began to investigate in his later works. His analysis of capitalism's metabolic rift with natural systems anticipated contemporary environmental problems, while his vision of sustainable production relationships provides frameworks for addressing current ecological challenges. Environmental movements have found inspiration in his critique of profit-driven production, while developing his insights to create comprehensive approaches to ecological and social transformation. The psychological and anthropological dimensions of Karl's theoretical work have influenced the understanding of human nature, social relationships, and individual development within capitalist and post-capitalist societies. His analysis of alienation provided insights into how economic relationships affect human consciousness and social behavior, while his vision of communist society outlined possibilities for more fulfilling forms of human development and social interaction. Contemporary psychology and anthropology have built on his insights, while investigating questions about human potential and social organization that he identified but did not fully develop. The technological implications of Karl's analysis have proven remarkably prescient as automation, artificial intelligence, and digital communication have transformed production relationships in ways that appear to confirm his predictions about capitalist development. His analysis of machinery's role in capitalist production and contemporary concerns about technological unemployment, while his vision of technology's liberating potential provides frameworks for imagining alternative uses of technological capabilities. Contemporary debates about technology's social impact often echo themes that he developed in his analysis of capitalist technological development. The international influence of Karl's theoretical work has created global intellectual and political movements that continue to shape contemporary debates about economic development, political organization, and social justice. His analysis of capitalism as a global system anticipated contemporary concerns about globalization, while his vision of international working-class solidarity inspires contemporary movements addressing global inequality and environmental destruction. The continuing relevance of his international perspective demonstrates the global scope of his theoretical insights and their applicability to contemporary world problems. The bloodline that began with medieval rabbinical scholars and evolved through Enlightenment intellectuals had produced the most influential critic of capitalism and visionary of socialist transformation in human history. The genetic, cultural, and educational factors that converge to create Karl Heinrich Marx demonstrate how accumulated intellectual traditions, personal experience, and historical circumstances can combine to produce revolutionary insights that transform human understanding of society and history. His theoretical legacy ensures that the name Marx will remain central to debates about economic justice, political freedom, and human liberation, as long as peoples struggle against oppression and seek to create more just and democratic forms of social organization.